What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast, episode 56. How to deal with overwhelm, cope with it, or turn it off, or just figure out what the heck is causing it. I'm Randy. I'm here with my buddy Danny. What's up, Danny?
What's up, Randy? I hate overwhelm.
Dude, it's a heck of a feeling because it's like you're stuck
It
in the
is.
mud and the tide is rising at the same time. It's just like quite a feeling.
Yeah, it's weird too. It's like, it's like you get caught up too. I think like when we're overwhelmed, it's like caught up in that day to day too, and it's like just the busyness of it. And it's, yeah, I don't know about you, but like, you get to the weekend and like you still don't take a break, right? Because you're still doing stuff. And it's like, I think sometimes I wonder if that's part of it too. Sometimes, at least in myself, I always wonder is if like you're going too many days in a row and like not stopping.
You know
Cause
what you
that,
just made me think about? And I should tell everybody that we don't have too much of a plan for this episode. Like we don't have like a 12-step guide for getting overwhelmed. This is just
no,
kind of
no.
us talking and figuring out amongst ourselves how to deal with what we're going through right now. But
And maybe we'll say something good.
yeah, what you reminded me of was kind of like the buffer over like the buffer that we have nowadays. Like it used to be where people would be bored. Like
Yeah.
before computers, before cell phones, people would be bored. Nowadays, people aren't bored. As soon as they start to feel like an inkling of boredom, they go check Facebook, they check Instagram, they watch YouTube videos, they watch Netflix, they do all this stuff, and we never actually get bored. And because of that, potentially that could be a big reason for the overwhelm because we never actually let ourselves kind of de-stress.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like that was a huge part of people's lives for the longest time, right? It was just having nothing going on for a moment. And now it's like there's always theoretically something. If you have your notifications on, right, you're constantly being reminded of shit. And on top of it, yeah, it is. It's interesting. That's a good point. I wonder if that is the case. Like we just never, I mean, people work with the TV on for God's sakes, right? So it's like there's always something in the background. And that background noise is always making your brain go. So maybe that is part of it, but you just, never stop.
Yeah. Because I mean, I was thinking about it. Like, there are all these things that I tell myself I have to do. Like, I have to get up in the morning. I have to work out. I have to journal. I have to read. I have to work. I have to learn. I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to do. And it's like, all these have tos aren't really have tos because really I don't have to do anything.
Well,
You know,
they're get tos.
exactly. They are get
Yeah.
tos. Like I'm lucky enough
Yeah.
to be able to do these things because really, what do you need to do? You need to sleep, you need to eat,
Yeah.
you need to breathe, maybe shower every
As
once in a
long as you're doing
while,
that,
change your
you're all
clothes.
right. Yeah. Well, it's, well, I don't know. I think it's like, but that's what happens, right? It's like you start all these things and you want, being busy feels good and it's great and it's fun. But, there's always a point at which where, you're in the middle, you hit plateaus, or you just like everything starts to feel like because you're already doing it, you don't want to stop. You don't want to give up on it, especially when you're making progress. That it starts to feel or transition into a feeling of work rather than like something fun that you're doing or whatever. So, when you fill your day up entirely, it starts to get difficult, I think, because like then you feel like you have no time for other things. And I think that's also where that feeling comes from, right? Because it's like when you have no time to do anything else besides that schedule, I think we start to feel overwhelmed because we feel like we don't have like maybe as much freedom as we want or something like that. Like where, it's like you feel constrained by it.
Yeah, like we're very curious creatures because on the one hand we like novelty, new things, but on the other hand we like
Yeah.
routine, things that we're used to. Uh, and so by doing these things over and over again, it kind of gives us a little bit of what we want. But once we start doing it over and over again, we lose the novelty of it. So
Yeah.
there's something that I actually heard in the book that I've been trashing for like weeks, that Think Like a Monk book. I've been listening
Yeah.
to
We're
it.
going to keep trashing it though.
Surprisingly good book. Yeah. And
Hey, but you trashed it, then you gave it a chance. That's what matters.
right. And so he said that when he during the up to 30 years that he was at a monastery, you know, uh, they would go for a
Hey,
walk.
isn't he only 30
Yeah,
though?
he's only 30. He was only in a
So
monastery
it's
for like
conceivably
10
impossible that he
years
was like,
tops. He was at a monastery.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. And so they would go for the same walk, 30-minute walk every day, pretty much the same course every day.
yeah.
And so like there's the routine of our lives. There's the work, there's the dropping the kids off at sports, there's the going to the gym, there's the whatever. However, every day before they went for the walk, the master would tell them, notice something different. So it would be like, today, notice a flower you've never seen before. Or today, notice a rock you've never seen before. Or today, notice a tree you've never seen before. So like even in that routine, there's still the novelty, and that kind of fulfills both sides of what we're looking for, because we're able to continue the routine, which is necessary for, because we wanted to do it initially at one point, but also it gives us that novelty.
No, I think that's a good point, right? It's making yourself aware of the reality that even though we pretend like things are exactly identical, they're really not. Every experience is a new experience. And I think, but that's part of, that's part of the sort of, the paradox or the sort of contradiction in our brains, where our brains like to make things routine because it's quicker to deal with. We know we're secure, it's easier, right? We grasp the thing, but then we also end up, not seeing anything new or not experiencing anything, or it seems like it's not new, when in fact it always is. And I think that's a good point. I like that, because it's like helping you kind of cultivate that awareness, or the kind of awareness that you need to sort of get yourself out of that idea like this is just the same thing every day over and over and there's no change.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And another thing that I want to suggest is something that I kind of discovered the last time we had an episode on overwhelm, which was kind of figuring out like what's the bare minimum that you have to do in a day. Because for me, I was stacking one thing on top, and they were all like good habits. It like all of these would definitely improve my life, but it got to a point where in order to be complete for a day, it would take like 16 hours, and I was just exhausted by the end of that day. And so by figuring out like what's the bare minimum that I need and want to do, because like I would figure out what that was, and then I would ask myself, hey, if I live my life, if I die and this is all I ever accomplish, will I be complete with this? And trying to figure out what that is. And then every day when you get to that point, stop and celebrate. Because then you're
like
done.
that.
Everything else is like cherries on top.
Bonus.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. Well, it's funny too that you mentioned that, because it's like, it's like, I think, when you fill your day up too, especially like with like hobbies or extra things that you're working on, extra projects, like it is great and it's fun, but at the same time, it's also, you're also, when you're engaged in them, it also is a lot of energy, right? It's a lot of focus and stuff. And trying to do that for like, say, 16 hours every day, you just get to a point where it's just too much. Like, you can't do the other things you need to survive and stuff. And you start to get worn out and things like that, I think. So, no, it's a good point, right? Thinking about, what do I actually need to do, and what's, something that I can treat as a bonus and fun, and it's okay sometimes if I don't do it or I don't get to that. That's not the end of the world. I think that's a good way to look at it. Mm-hmm. It is funny, because I think when you have a lot of things you're interested in too, it's especially hard, because it's like, we have this idea of like, all, like you said, all these things are good for me, all these things benefit me. And that idea of like progress, that we're never complete, we're never done growing, we're never done getting, but we could always theoretically do more. We could always theoretically level up again, right? And I think that's also kind of a problematic way to think, because then you turn it around and think you're failing when you're not constantly progressing in this way. And it's like, it's also just, are you happy? Are you living the life? All these other questions I think that are important get kind of pushed aside.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I'm struggling with right now. So like for a while, I was doing these computer certification courses, and I still technically, quote unquote, am doing them, because I still am studying.
Yeah, you're knocking them out like in a pretty rapid succession.
Right. So herein lies the issue, that I was completing one certification every 1 or 2 months. And so like it was like really, really hard, because for,
it's a lot of crap
before
to learn.
and the 2 weeks before the exam, I was like doing nothing but studying. And so like I was building up momentum, but it was somewhat difficult. And now I'm like going a bit slower. And there's this whole like, is it good enough? Am I actually going to get it done? Am I like, am I not going fast enough? And so I keep trying to remind myself that, like, patiently, persistently, I'm bound to succeed. However, there's also this thing where, for a while, every month or two, I was taking another certification exam. Now I haven't taken one in 2 months, and I'm still about a month out from being ready for this next one. So it's like, am I slowing down? Am I going to be able to do? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the issue, right? Because, it's like you're doing this because it's something you want to do. It's not necessary in the sense that you'll perish if you don't do it. But, I think, like, I guess taking it slower, do you feel like you're learning the material better?
No, I feel
well,
like I'm just not learning. I'm just not putting enough time and energy into it. I'm distracted a bit.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny. I think, like, sometimes, like, when you, like, kind of putting everything in like that and cramming can be helpful because it can be a way to sort of, in a way, force your focus so that you kind of remember the stuff really easily. But, like, maybe, like, try and think of it as, like, taking your time with it, digesting it, and maybe you'll learn it better and doing it slowly. I mean, treating it as something like, it's something you want to do, and you will get it done eventually, right? It's not like it's not going to happen as long as you keep committing time to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I know that feeling sucks when you feel it really is a crappy feeling when you think you're going too slow and you imagine like I should be there by the end of the year or something, but it's just unrealistic. So it's like, this is one of the problems though. It's our expectations, I think, get very high for ourselves, right? They increase at a rate, I think, that we can't necessarily keep up with always.
So how do we cope with it? How do we stop the overwhelm? How do we deal with it? How do we get through it?
I mean, I think sometimes, it's just a matter of, I do think sometimes it's just a matter of taking a break from things, like giving yourself an entire day off, doing things different, because a lot of times I think that helps you come back at it with a fresh attitude where it's not so like, because when you feel stressed about it all the time when you're doing it, it's like you're also not doing it well, because you got your other concerns and you're probably burnt out a little. So taking a break does help. And maybe also, like, is it just a matter of reprioritizing? Like, is it how fast do you really want it? I mean, asking yourself honestly, like, when do I really want, I mean, obviously you want it done now, but I mean, like, realistically, when do you really want it done? And how can I make that happen realistically without kind of overwhelming myself again? But, I think also keeping in mind too, that stuff always changes. Even if you set a very realistic plan, it's possible that in 3 weeks you find something else that's also really interesting that you want to incorporate, and then that plan goes out the window and you got to redo it.
Mm-hmm. And also, while you're saying that, there's also like a little bit of a fear underneath that, like, what happens if I do all this and this isn't what I want? Like that fear is there all the time.
Yeah.
And it's the dumbest freaking fear, because I know the answer is just, well, then I'll try something different. But like, it's the most, like, it just completely stops me in my tracks, because I'm like,
totally,
but what if this isn't it? Like, all this wasted time and effort and everything. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's so funny you said that, because I was just literally thinking about that the other day. And it's like, when I guess I always remind myself though, like, even if that does happen, it's like, well, at least you still learned all of it. You still proved to yourself that you could, which I think is valuable in itself. And it might, I don't know, I think it's still something you learned because you wouldn't have known otherwise. I think that's the other thing we always forget. We think of wasted time, I think, a lot of times as, literally a waste, but it's like you wouldn't have known that was the case unless you did it anyway. And so it still would have been something you wanted to try, and you just would not have known that it wasn't work, right?
True. And also, it gives you like this generalist sense of things. It gives you like a whole nother avenue of thought that other people don't have. So like, a lot of people think that like everything is just a solid tier, like straight up, that you just have to learn things in order. But actually, the more different areas the better kind of grounding it gives you. Like when I grew up,
yeah, totally.
I was always fixing stuff around the house with my dad. And then I got jobs working at a bike shop, fixing bikes. And later I was fixing cars. And then when I was like working as a veterinary surgeon, it was like really easy because I'd been fixing stuff my whole life. Everybody else had to learn how to fix stuff. And if something didn't go according to the books, they were just like, oh, what do I do? But like It's just you learn all these things in one area and you can apply them to another area and it totally works. So yeah, there's that.
No, I think people don't realize that everything has implications and application to other areas, and you're always a better problem solver when you have a broad base of skills and knowledge. I mean, that's totally true. And I think we emphasize right now, the emphasis on specialization and mastering, one thing. It's like, but it doesn't even mean you're necessarily great at it if you can't solve problems effectively and creatively. So I think that's a good point. Yeah, it is. I mean, I think so. There's always that side of it. And I mean, too, just being just being thankful or grateful that you're able to do it is also something I think, when we get caught up in being overwhelmed, we also are caught up in really, I think it is a negative thought process because it's starting to sort of look at our life and all these things we're doing and starting to question them when maybe all we need is like to take a break, prioritize, or just look at it differently. Maybe it's just a matter of like, okay, I wanted to do this when I started, but now it's 6 months later. I got other things going on. Is this actually still what I want? Do I maybe need to just sit down and like kind of get a better sense or get clear on what the hell I'm doing? That could be it too.
Yeah, I think you just put your finger on it there a couple times in that the last sentence there. How like, we keep thinking that if we do a little bit more, then we'll get to that point where we want to be. And really, we're already at the only point we're ever going to be. So like,
now.
Yeah, exactly. So actually like sitting down and meditating, focusing on your breath, meditating, stopping, doing that. Because the more that you can appreciate now, the more you'll be able to appreciate wherever you get to when you get there. But it's the limited capacity we have now. And nowadays we're like so forward thinking. Like I think about this all the time, how like good we are at moving forward. We're so good at moving forward, we can't even be where we are. And
oh God, no.
Yeah.
You're always existing ahead of yourself. It's like your mind's not even in the moment. That's not necessarily a good place to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we run into problems, right? Yeah.
So taking that time to kind of slow down, sit down, meditate, do whatever you need to do. And yeah. That being said, what are some good ways to kind of slow down, meditate, do that stuff?
I always like taking walks. You'd mentioned that, but I actually know the monk doing that. I do love that. I think that's a good thing to do, to just get you away from stuff and gives you a chance to move and think, outside of your normal environment, which is helpful. You also mentioned, I think meditation is great because it's a way to kind of just calm yourself down. Especially too, I noticed that works for me really well, especially like if I was really busy all day and stressed or feeling overwhelmed, especially at night, taking like 10 minutes and doing some mindful breathing really does help you sleep better. And like, because if you go to bed feeling like that, I think like your brain's still running all night, in a sense. And like, I never feel like I slept well, or, it's like the next day just, like, you get in that, like where you feel like every day is literally just like a continuation and nothing. It's like it's kind of mess. So I think those are good. Definitely.
Yeah. And you mentioned a good point there, the habit stacking. So like associating with a certain time of day or a certain activity so that you can do it on a regular basis. So like doing it before you go to sleep for a few minutes, or doing it after you work out, or doing it while you're waiting for your coffee to brew in the morning. Like that way it's always there. It becomes that time of the day for you and you get it in regularly.
I just thought too, I think too, like the feeling of being overwhelmed too, I think is like there is so many things we could do. And it's that feeling like you're never going to fit it all in, right? Like I think about that all the time. Like I have so many things I would love, like so many things I'm interested in that I would love to do. But I know all of them take time. And especially like a lot of times to do it well, even just like fun stuff takes a lot of time to do a lot of times. So it's like really kind of like, I think this is one of the hardest things. This is just, really trying to figure out like what choices matter to me, like what ones are the most important, because then at least that way I'm not missing out on anything that's crucial to my life, right? Or to my happiness.
Dude, I mean, that's like exactly it. It's like you can literally do anything. You can't do everything, and you need to figure out what the heck you want to do.
What? And that's the worst part too, because you feel like you have no time when you really like all the things you want to do. If I listed all the things I want to do, I would need probably like, I don't know how many lifetimes. So that's out of the question. And it's like, well, then what? Yeah, no, I know. It's that's the worst. So really, but it's hard also. I think that's the other problem. It's just also hard to know exactly what is the most important sometimes, because it's like, you're not always sure. Like, it's not always easy to rank things, especially if you've never done them before, or if they're things that you just like doing, we only have like a mild familiarity with it. So it's like, it's difficult.
What do you think? What do you think the Stoics or the existentialists would have said to this?
I mean, I think, if you're focused on the good life, right? I think the Stoics would have been, you know, definitely interested in more in virtue and cultivating a character and focus. And maybe that is part of it, right? If you focus on yourself, if you focus on calming your mind, if you focus on character, maybe these worries wouldn't be as pressing, because you would have, I think you would have a better sense maybe of like what your good life is, because it's more about just your development in that sense, not these external things and doing all this stuff. Because at the end of the day, I mean, they're not all necessary, right? Not even a little. And I think likewise, the existentialists say, focusing on authenticity too, right? So what really matters to you? What really is important? And are all of these things really important, or is it just something you're telling yourself? Is it just something, I don't know. That is, but it's still, yeah.
That brings up two really good questions to kind of like sit down, write down everything you're doing and everything you want to do, and then ask yourself, is this something that will build my character? And then ask yourself, is this something that I actually want to do? Or is this something that I'm doing for some other reason, for parents, for society, for any of that stuff? I think that is a really good exercise to do, because then you can kind of figure out if it doesn't build your character and it's not something that's for you, then definitely just cross it off the list. But if it gets both, then you should definitely do it. But then if it only gets one of the two, then maybe you can kind of weed out some things.
Get a little bit of prioritization there going. Yeah, I know. I think that would help. And it's funny too, because I think, if we, maybe part of it too is if we spent more time on our characters, we would be better equipped to deal with that feeling of being overwhelmed. We would recognize it quicker. We would be more equipped to kind of realize that maybe it's not as pressing as it really, like, we stress ourselves out with it, right? But maybe it really isn't that way. We just don't need to respond to it.
Well, I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like to have been a Stoic and been overwhelmed,
Yeah, right. Well, I think, look at Marcus Aurelius was an emperor. I'm pretty sure he was numerous times overwhelmed. There's a lot going on that he was like, watching over. So
good point.
I imagine, especially, he probably was definitely overwhelmed at times. But I think, what does it get us though to be overwhelmed? Because it doesn't do anything for us. It just stresses us out, and it just makes us, you know what I mean? It doesn't help us solve our problems.
Mm-hmm.
It might be, maybe that's it. Maybe it's just indicative of a problem. It's not actually, you know what I mean? It's not the problem itself. It's just telling us that there is an issue. Like when we feel overwhelmed, it's just telling us that maybe we are pushing too hard. Maybe there is too much crap. Maybe we're not doing the right things. And maybe that's why that feeling's there.
Mm. Yeah, like I always like to think of like historical figures that I kind of admire to try and figure out what they would think at these same things. So I'm reading this not the autobiography, but I'm reading a biography of Ben Franklin. He was like arguably a very industrious man, and very skilled at doing many things.
Failed a ton.
Yeah. So and so like I kind of wonder what he would think about being overwhelmed. I think he would just say you just need to work harder.
That's the
do
problem,
more.
right? That's the problem too. I think, like a lot of these, it is funny because I think everybody definitely experiences it, right? And I think, whether you consider it a problem or not would depend on, the type of person you are. And maybe that is part of it. Maybe it is just like, having the right character to just keep going and not seeing that necessarily as a problem. Or, like I said, looking at it as maybe just like not necessarily an issue, but just a note, like a sort of notification to yourself that maybe, because our emotions are always a guide, like, they point us in the right direction, usually if we stop and actually think about it. And I feel like being overwhelmed is like it's an emotion, right? It's like a response to things that, right? I would think of it that way.
You know, I like what you said there, where thinking about it like it's not even a problem. Because like nowadays we're always like, oh, I'm overwhelmed. Like, oh, I need to, let me go see a therapist. I'm overwhelmed. And and like, but if I look back historically, you know, like every time I've been overwhelmed, it was always right before a big breakthrough.
Yeah, because you probably hit a plateau, right? You're probably at that point where you've been doing a lot. You might be, I think people feel a lot of times too when they're working on something, they hit that roadblock that's really difficult to overcome because it's like you're putting all this effort in, but you're not, the progress has all of a sudden come to a halt. And that just means you're waiting. Yeah, you're going to get there. I think that's also part of it. So looking, yeah, I mean, keeping in mind, you will get through it too. But it is funny. I think you're right. Nowadays we turn everything into a freaking huge issue. Everybody's so dramatic, right? It's
Yeah.
like we really do, though. It is. And it's almost hard not to. I think maybe it's because all like I was thinking about this the other day. We watch all these TV shows and movies and stuff, and like they obviously like make everything more dramatic because it's a show and stuff. Where you're reading books like fantasy and stuff. It's always more dramatic, and it's like we almost expect life to be like that, but it's not. So we just make it that way by
Mhm.
blowing
Well,
everything out of
also
proportion.
the ability to just create this. Like I was thinking about this the other day. Is um I was talking with a family member and like sharing some things that had gone on, and I was thinking about it because I was like, you know, back in the day, we wouldn't be able to do this over the phone. You know, there was no
No,
FaceTime, there was none of that. The only time you could do it is by writing a letter, which would take a week in the mail, or when you actually
or
met up
longer.
and,
Yeah.
you meet up a few times a year. And so there wasn't this ability to gripe like we're able to do nowadays. But nowadays, anytime anybody has a problem, boom, you can post it on Twitter immediately. And not only
Yeah.
that, but you have all these addicts who are just looking for something because they're almost bored, and they'll comment on it, they'll retweet it, they'll do
Yeah.
all of this stuff because we're all just kind of addicted to it. And it makes dealing with challenges a lot less personal almost, because
Yeah.
we can just put it out on, like we put it out and make it somebody else's problem immediately.
Well, you also put it out and you want validation, right? And you also made another good point, I think, too. You're right. The connectedness, like even like it's great that we can talk to people we love, whenever we want. But you're also right that that's also a pressure in itself, right? To the feeling that you have to speak to, when in the past that wouldn't have been true at all. You might not have seen them for quite a long time in between. We act like, but everybody acts like it's a huge deal when it's not immediate because that sense that it has to be now, it has to be every day. And I think that's just also maybe we haven't gotten to the point yet where we're like adapted to this new way of
I'm
doing things
definitely
because
not
it is, I
adapted
mean,
to it.
yeah, we weren't. I mean,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true. But like, I think so. Maybe that's part of it too, is keeping in mind that, like the world does move a lot faster now. It just does. It's easy to do these things that would have been very difficult in the past. So, I mean, even writing an email, which gets sent instantly, is so much easier than writing a letter by hand. If you think about it, you have spell checker, you can, easily delete things. It's like that time is so short that it takes to do it that it's not this long process. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe, it's like there's also just, and maybe that's also the feeling of the potential of just so much to do, right? Because you literally can do almost anything right now. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, you have to do all this work ahead of time.
Yeah. And it's also like another thing about overwhelm is like it's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like we want to change something.
Yeah.
And so I've been working with like trying to be patient and not changing anything. Like I'm trying to be very, very patient because it's, historically it's been in my nature that like as soon as something's uncomfortable, I need to go do something, change something,
Go,
do
yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
And so now like when it's uncomfortable, I'm trying to be a lot slower to change, because maybe that discomfort is there to change me.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a really good point too. And just when I think I noticed that with myself, when you identify it, they're like, oh, I don't feel comfortable. Like it makes it easier to also not immediately run away from it. And I think when you like don't consciously admit it, you just run away, because you're trying to just avoid it completely. So I like that. Yeah, facing it and sort of, just sitting with it, dealing with it. It's a good way to be, because I think it helps you before you make sort of a rash decision that might not even be the right one. Yeah, it's a good point. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I often wonder too, is being over, is it like kind of like a, how can I say this? Like, is it a new, like, kind of like contemporary problem because we have so many things we could do and we're lucky in that sense? And like, you know what I mean? Like, because I was just thinking about this, like before, dude, if you wanted to do something, like before there was cars, right? Imagine like you wanted to go see a show in New York or something. It would take you forever to get there. And it was a crappy ride. Like, I mean, we just take for granted how quick it is to do things, to travel around the world, to like, you know what I mean? So it's like we expect all this shit right now, but it's like that dude, crossing the Atlantic used to take 6 months, and you could die from not having vitamin C and stuff. Like, I mean, that's insane. So stuff just now you get peanuts, mid-flight. It only takes 8 hours and you need a snack. You know what I mean? It's like, it's funny, but like it's changed it dramatically. So I think maybe that's part of it. There's just this like opportunity to do so much that you couldn't do before.
That's a really good point. Like I used to be so amazed when people had plans for stuff like months out, because I was like, how do you know what's going to be happening then? Like anything more than next week or maybe next month at the most, it's like, wow. But yeah, you needed to back then. And that's probably part of it. Like we expect things to move so fast, and
dude, if you had a friend who moved to a different state a couple hundred years ago, you would have had to plan that shit like 6 months in advance, just to like coordinate the letter mailing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no. So I think that maybe that is like, just remind yourself that you're lucky to be, in a sense, to have so many interests, so many things you want to do, and so many ways you could do it, and that maybe you're just like, yes, you might be overwhelmed, but maybe it's not a bad thing. It just is telling you that you need to maybe like reprioritize or take a break. That's all, and kind of think things through a little bit.
Or just be grateful for all the opportunities to do stuff.
Yeah, right.
Like that's a pretty cool thing too.
Yeah, it is pretty awesome, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You think about it, like, dude, think about it. Before, like everything you wanted to do, you literally had to like if you wanted to paint something, you had to go make the freaking paints. Like everything involved like this process of like also putting all the stuff together to do it. Like now you just like everything's like there. You just go get it. It's crazy.
And you don't even have to go get it. You just order it and it's at your house in a few hours to the next day.
And then you get mad because it takes like 36 hours to get there.
Right? Crazy world we live in. Crazy world. So what do you think are the overall general takeaways from this? I think gratitude is definitely important. We just touched on that.
Yeah. Well, gratitude, I think mindfulness I've also had, and being more self-aware.
Yeah, and perspective. Like,
oh God, yeah.
Like I'm sure everybody who clicked on this episode did it because they're like, oh, I'm going through some overwhelm too. This is bad. And like maybe changing that perspective, maybe overwhelm isn't bad. Maybe it's exactly where you're supposed to be. And it's actually what happens right before a breakthrough. Yeah.
And maybe it's just like, also fortunate in a way because you have so much to do, I think that's not a bad thing either. Or have so many things you want to do. That's a good way to look at it. I like that.
That is a good point. So we will leave it there with you guys. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Existential Stoic podcast, dealing with overcoming overwhelm. Make sure to join us midweek for a quick fix and listen, watch on YouTube, all that fun stuff. I'm Randy. That's my buddy Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Randy.